right, I got quarter till, so I'll go ahead and get started. Hey, I'm Fred Zelhart from CodaBears. I'm going to quit sharing my webcam so that there's more room on the screen for everything else. Strike, there we go. So we're going to go over SSRS tips and tricks. Here's our agenda for the day. We're going to cover these items. I'm just going to jump into it because usually I run short on time. So hey, source control. People ask me, what the heck is source control? Well, it's basically a repository of your code. Programmers like me, or the people that work at Microsoft, use this because as they write code, they can actually put it into source control and you can figure out what's changed from each time. So the key thing with source control is it stores the changes. So you'll have your original file and then what you changed, and you've got this history all throughout time. And it's nice to be able to view that history. Also lets you go back in time. So if I need to say, hey, I rolled something out and then somebody comes to me and says, oh, wait, it was working 2 weeks ago, but now it's not, I can go back to the version that's 2 weeks ago, find out what my difference is, and figure out what I screwed up. Yes, that would be on me. A lot of source control lets you lock files, meaning if I pull the file out so that I'm going to work on it, I've locked the file. Nobody else can make those changes while I'm working on it. So there's different philosophies on whether that's good or bad. Some people enjoy it. I do, because I can prevent people from merging things the wrong way. And you often run into tools such as Git, Team Foundation Server, Azure DevOps, and Visual Source Safe, which if you're still using, please throw it away. It's a very bad tool anymore. These others are much better. What's the point behind source control? Well, I can know what changed when. That's very important. So right now, if you think about it, when you make changes to your report, how do you know who changed it and when they did and what they were doing? You don't. So if you work with the source control system, when you make a change to your reports, you can pull them down, check them into source control. Now you've got that history going on. So you've got that audit trail, you've got a history, you know who changed it. So it's not just, oh, somebody changed the file. It's, no, I know Fred did this. I know Calvin did this. I know Bob did this. I know Betty did this. So I can track things. I've also got a backup of the working report. Why do I want a backup? I've got it on SQL. It's in SSRS. Everything's working. I got backups of all my SQL stuff. Right. I don't trust SQL backups unless you actually go and restore them. I don't trust any backup unless you go and restore it. This is another method of doing a backup. It's another way of just making sure everything's there. And again, with the history, that's also in some ways more important than just having a backup of the report. So that's why I tend to do that. And again, I can know who changed what, when, and why. I know everything that happened, so very handy. We also use this for, as far as source control, we source control not just the code, not reports. We also do BAQs, customizations, anything. Documentation can all be source control. So it's very happy all the way around. Another thing that I do, templates, and I'll start, I think I've got this slide and one more, and then we actually go into actually using things. Why do I want to use templates, and what are templates? Well, I make a template for my customers and ourselves, because we actually use SSRS here, so that I've got a consistent look. The reason for that, everything's in the same spot, same place all the time. So my reports are very easy to work with, consistent. I don't have to worry about, oh, page numbers on the bottom left on this report, it's in the top right on this report. Oh, this title's got it centered, this one's got it on the bottom right, I don't know. So you get that consistency, which is going to make your reports easier to digest for your people, because they're not going, oh, why are we using orange here and red here and black here? Doesn't make sense. You can be consistent. It's going to give you a better look, and you'll find that your information is actually easier to comprehend because people going from report to report to report know where things are automatically. And I'll typically have two templates, one for the portrait and one for landscape. Bruce is saying on the template, put the report name and revision. Well, the report name typically is going to be your title. I do agree on the revision. A lot of people will put like the date modified or something on the bottom left. Again, depends on how you're controlling your documents. If you need to go that level, source control also gives you that way of coming back to it as two. Boy, that was a weird sentence out of my mouth. Woohoo! I'm a strong advocate. Work with your marketing or your art folks in-house. Make sure you've got the proper colors, logos, and layout. So typically, your art department's going to be very picky about usage of the logos, or if they're not, they should be. you should have your colors matching your logo. So there are specific colors, make sure you're using them. And of course, the other benefit of using templates, saves a lot of time when you go to actually create a new report. Instead of jockeying things around and having to remember, oh, what do I do for this? Copy the template, you're off and rocking. So it makes it a lot easier. I think this is the only other slide I'm going to do, and then we'll come back and jump through all the slides later. I also am a big advocate of using stored procedures for my reports. So when you do Epicor, you've got RDDs. If you're going to make a report from scratch, or you need to add to an Epicor report that you can't fit into the RDD, for example, I ran into a place where somebody wanted a certificate of compliance added into the pack slip. They wanted that printed at the same time. So there just wasn't the information that I needed to do the certificate of compliance inside of the RDD. I didn't want to go jockeying around with it. So I just made an SSRS report that became a sub-report for the certificate of compliance, and I can just call the stored procedures to pull the information from Epicor that I need there. So when you end up in that situation where you're querying a SQL database, if you're familiar with SSRS, you can go and type the query in automatically, or you can choose a stored procedure. Typically, I would tell you, go for a stored procedure. One, it's much easier to edit a stored procedure inside of a SQL Server Management Studio than trying to figure out where you've got a query problem inside of SSRS. So it just makes more logical sense. Also an advocate, use SQL for what it's good for. SQL is very good about aggregating information, meaning get me the sum, get me the min, get me the max, get me totals, things like that, group things, pulling the information back, being able to filter the information, and of course, sorting. Those are big things that you can do inside of SQL. SQL's built for that. SSRS, although it can do those things, it's going to be slower in the long run, especially if you're working with a couple hundred pages of information and you're trying to sort that. That's going to take a lot longer time in SSRS. Whereas if you do it in SQL, it's going to be a lot faster. So make use of the tool for what the tool can do. All right, so the next thing I'm going to show you is how do I alternate row colors? Well, the basic easy thing is this little formula. Don't worry, I'll publish all my slides. You'll get all these formulas and things. Basically, I'll go in and I'll set a background color with a conditional if. What this does is it says if the row number, which is basically a counter, I'm on row 1, 2, 3, 4 out of my details. This scope is the grouping that you're on. So when you group things in SSRS, you can name your groups. You can also put in the word nothing, and that will work for the entire data set. Mod 2 basically says, hey, divide that count by 2 and give me the remainder. So if I'm talking about 2 divided by 2, the remainder is 0. 3 divided by 2, remainder is 1. So that's just going to keep going 0, 1, 0, 1. So if it's equal to 0, I'm going to output one color. Otherwise, I'm going to do this other color. And those color can be hex colors. If you're not familiar with what hex color are, talk to your art department. They'll know it. Otherwise, just Google. Google literally hex color, give you a nice tutorial on it. You can also use the word nothing for no color. And what that means is whatever the color of whatever's behind your text is going to bleed through. So if I've got a background on my table, that'll bleed through. If I've got a background on my entire report, that'll bleed through. If I've got a color on the report, that'll bleed through. So you're basically just overwriting. So through the magic of the world here, we're going to try and do a few of these things. Oops, I can't make it together, which somebody wanted before. So I'm just going to go into my template, portrait. Like I said, basic layout. I've got my report title, logo, nice little bar that we always have. I've got my page number consistently and the date it ran. And this is where, following what Bruce said, maybe I'd put the page number in the center, and over on the left, I'd have the revision and date that it was used. So it's also a good key that he brings up. So if I want to use my template, I'm just going to click on my template inside of reports. I'm going to hit Control C. Sorry, you can't see that. And I'll hit Control V. Control C is copy, Control V is insert. That gets me a copy of template portrait. So what I can do is I can just say, hey, this is going to be my customer report. And then double click it, make sure I'm on my customer report, come up here, go into my title, customers. So now I've got my basic stuff already set, including I've got a data source that I had inside my template portrait, or my template. So I automatically get that data source. I don't have to do anything. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to walk through kind of what I was telling you about. hey, I'm going to use my data source. I'm going to use a stored procedure. I'm going to do this one of orders get for company. What I like to do, whatever my stored procedure is, I put up as the name for the stored procedure. That way, when I go over to my data sets, everything kind of flows through and I can say, oh, that's the stored procedure I'm calling. Otherwise, you're going to get a default of data set 1, data set 2, data set 3. Makes it kind of difficult when you're going, well, what am I pulling information from where? So I'm just going to drop in a simple table here. Table, there we go. I'll just crank this guy up to the top and I'm just going to drop some fields on it. Email address, my order number, order line, joink. And you'll notice one of the nice things you can do is just kind of drag these things and you get that little blue eye bar. It'll automatically add things over for you. I just want to get some fields out here so that we can work with them. Another simple trick, if you're dealing with numbers, I always like to right align them. In English, actually most European languages, we right align numbers so that it's easier to see the decimal places and things. I'm also going to fix up my date. So I can either go to the placeholder properties because I had the actual field to collect, or if I've got the cell, go to text box properties. And I'm just going to set that to be a date format. Joink. And we'll just kind of preview this real quick. My company, Epic 06, run that. So I've got a nice little basic report. What I don't like about this, typically I'd make my header a little bit bolder and stuff, but these lines, all these grid lines, if I print this out and try to read it, or even if I bring it up on the screen, it's very hard to go, especially when you've got blank areas, to make sure your eye doesn't skip down 1 or 2 or up 1 or 2 lines, and now you're mixing information together. So it can get very complex to kind of work with that. So we're just going to quickly fix a couple things up here. I'm going to bold that. I'm going to make my font color white, which will make that go away. Then I'm going to make the black. That's something I typically do so that it stands out a little bit better. And I'm going to hide all my grid lines. So I just highlighted all the cells over there. I'm going to come over to my border color. Why they decided to make it light gray instead of black, I don't know, when black is the default, but they do. And then I'm going to set my border style to none. So now if I preview, oops, and I forgot to set a default there. We'll come back and do that. So now I've got a whole bunch of data, but it's also still hard to read across. Now, before I forget, I'm going to set a default on my company. Add Epic 06. There we go. So in order to do the background color, I'm just going to click on this handle for the entire row, come over my background color, and I'm going to choose expression. And I'm just going to put in equals that if row number, open paren, nothing, which means I'm going to get everything in my row group. I'm doing the nothing row group, means I'm ordering on the entire data set. Mod2 equals 0, comma, quote. Let's call it, I'll just go and pick this guy. Choink, light gray, don't need the extra quote. Otherwise, I'm going to be nothing, which will be whatever the color is on the page, that's what's going to bleed through. Click OK, go to my preview. Now I've got something that's a little color banded. What this does is because my eye will follow that color across, it's easier for me to visually track all the way across when I'm reading a line of information. So it just tends to work out a little bit better for there. Something that's I just kind of like to do, makes it a lot easier. Now let's say that I want to deal with hyperlinks. I like to make my reports functional. So if it's just a list of data, not really doing much, but what I could do is I could make this email address, which on this is always blank. So I'm going to replace this with email because I believe I have that hard coded to fill in my email address. Yep. What I can do is I can actually come in and make this a hyperlink so that when I print this report or when I view it online, it's a hyperlink and it will start an email for me. So I can come in here, go to text box properties, do an action. Got to remember that it's on the bottom. And with that action, you could go to a report, you can go to a bookmark within this report, or I can go to a URL. When I go to a URL, I just have to specify the text. And if you're not aware of it, mail to is the way to specify that you want to do a mail link. And then I'll just bring in my email field. So it'll start mail to : and then my email. When I do that, I'll hit OK, hit preview. So now when I hover over this, you'll see it's a little hand instead of the arrow. And if I click on that, it's going to start up an email for me. So there's a whole bunch of things that you can do with the mail to link. You can put in the subject, a default body, so on and so forth. So you can actually put things in here. Now, if I distribute this, if somebody clicks on that, it would actually go to the email address for that company. Now, granted, like I said, the email address on the companies were all blank, so I just hard-coded fred@codabears.com in here, make sure that I had something in there. So going pretty easy to work with that.
Mr. Fred, you've got 4 questions now in the hopper here.
Yes. All right, I'm using Visual Studio to make reports. Yes, I love Visual Studio. There's also Report Builder. Both the tools work almost the same. There's something you can do inside of Report Builder that you can't do inside of Studio, and that is web parts, I believe. And in all of my experience, I've been working with Report Builder since it came out. I've used report parts all of 0 times. So that doesn't bother me that it's in Report Builder and not in Studio. The other thing that I like that's in Studio that is not in Report Builder, which is a big sell to me, is I can click on something and I can see, hey, that's my order quantity text box. And if I need to jump to a certain control, I can jump to it by going text box 16, and then I can see the properties for it. What that lets me do is if there's a problem in my report, if you've ever run into this, you'll see, hey, there's a formula error on text box 22. Well, in Report Builder, you have to go through and click through all the text boxes until you find 22. Inside of Studio, I can just go straight to it, and then whatever that is, I can deal with the formula there. So I like that a little bit better. Studio also integrates with source control systems. So I can check things in and out. I can easily work with and view the history. So it makes it a better tool for me for what I'm doing. What version of SSRS am I using? I am on 2019, I believe, when I do my deployments. This version of Studio is, let's do help about, make sure, because watch, I'll screw it up. We're on 2019 of Visual Studio. 2022 is out. 2022 will, I believe they just released the report builder parts for it. If you're not familiar, Visual Studio will often come out with a new version, and it takes 6 months for them to come out with the data tools parts that let you do SSRS. So I typically stay a version behind for about a year, make sure they work all the bugs out of that new tool, and then I'm off and rocking. Is there a general best practice on where to put formats, visibility, etc., placeholder versus field? Got it. Epicor has these all over the place from what I can see. So in general, what I do is if my cell only has one field, I'll typically go in and do the text box properties. If it's going to apply to everything in the cell, if I've got multiple fields in a cell, because I could have order date, actually I could do order line, go here, choink. Let's say I did order num / and then I wanted to drop in order line here, create a new placeholder, order line. So now I've got 2 fields in here, and it's going to look a little funky. I'll just do this so you can see it. So if I wanted these all bolded, then I would do things at the text box level or the cell level and bold those. If I needed to do something specific to this field, like if it's order line 6, I always want that in red, then I would come in and click on the actual placeholder itself and put the property on there. So it just kind of depends on what level of control do you need. If it should be on the entire cell, do it at the cell level. If it's something specific in the cell, do it specific in the cell. That's typically what I do. Will grouping cause a difference in those row colors? Depending on what you want to do, yes. So if I group and I still use the nothing for the scope, then it's using the row number out of the data set. So in that case, grouping's not going to have effect. I'll have my group header, and whatever the previous color it was before the group header in my detail line, the next color would be chosen. So if this was white, the next color would be gray. If this was gray, the next color would be white. So that might be what you want. If you wanted the first line of every group to always be a certain color, then change the scope. So change the scope from nothing to, and I'll get this up again, choink, expression. So where I've got nothing here for my scope, then I would have it be whatever my row group name is, and that would be in quotes. So let's say we're grouping by state, and my row group name was state, then I would have state inside of here instead of nothing. And so then it's counting the rows particular to that group. So that's how you can get around that. I'm going to cancel that. Trying to get through all of these. Formats, visibility difference. Are there processes that you can do with on-prem that you can't do with cloud? Yes, stored procedures. Although in theory you can get a read-only copy of your database, I don't know if you can do stored procedures in the cloud. With on-prem, you've got access to SQL. It's one of the great things about it. As well, it depends on what kind of cloud you're talking, because you can also put yourself in the cloud. You don't have to go with Epicor Cloud. So in that case, you're using your SQL, you've got control of your SQL again, you'll have your stored procedures and you can do that. So that makes it a little bit easier to work with. I find stored procedures also a lot faster for working with things. Is there a standard procedure for trying to edit reports in Visual Studio that were created in Report Builder? Every time it seems the data sources and data sets need to be re-added. So it depends on what you're doing. So when I work inside of Studio, I've got my project here and I've got my reports from here. If I were going to work in Report Builder and then import it into Studio, as long as my data source is the same, it should hold it. But if I needed to, I could come over to my data sources for my report, and all I have to do is just drop down and choose my shared data source. So because the names could be different, you might end up with that problem. Your data sets should stay, because those, although they're tied to the data source, the name of the stored procedure or the query that you're running, that's going to be set. So as long as you don't change this name right here, just change where you're linking from in here, or if you're doing an embedded connection, change the string that's in here. Don't change this, then you should never have to change your data sets. Those are the queries. If you use an RDD from Epicor as your data source, how do you set up your data source in Visual Studio? Just come into your data source and have it point to the Report Builder database instead of what I've got for my stored procedures. So you just point your server name, and then instead of EMUG 2087, I'd choose something like E11 reports, because the RDDs, those get stored into that report database. And what you would have to do is then run the report in Epicor, tell it to archive for a period, grab that GUID, and then you'll use that GUID as a parameter. Typically, most of the Epicor reports have a parameter called table GUID. So that's where you'd put that in. And oftentimes, to make my life easier, I would go in and I'll just double click on the parameter, set a default value, and then type in, not type in, I'd actually copy paste that GUID so that I don't have to keep typing or keep copying pasting. When you deploy the report, just make sure you unset that default value, otherwise it'll be set there for life. We're on Epicor on the cloud SaaS rather than a local server. Do you have experience building SSRS reports and integrating into Epicor on the cloud? It's pretty painful to preview reports when building them, as you have to upload the modified report using report style maintenance and then preview by running the report every time you need to preview what you made changes to. So if you're going to do that inside of Epicor, I believe it's when you go to run the report, there is a button that will let you download a data set, and you can actually point to that data set and use that when you're developing the reports. Epicor has documentation for that in their PDF for SSRS report building. They talk about pulling the report down locally and also pulling down a data set so that you don't have to keep running the report, and you're not bound to trying to query the cloud data set while you're doing development. And that does work pretty well, Caleb. Okay, let me jump back. Where were we at? So we did alternating colors, we did hyperlinks, repeating table headers. So when I go to preview this, you'll notice as I go through this from page one, whoops, that's the end of page one. If I go to page two, hey, my headers are missing. They're missing from all the other pages. So this is a common problem that people end up having. How to fix this? It's actually pretty simple, but you have to know the right steps. So what you do is you come over to this column groups area and this little drop down here, which you never see, trust me, unless you know it's there. Go into advanced mode. That's going to get you a whole bunch of statics here, and you're going to get a static here. What you want to do is click up in this top header row and come down to repeat with Tablix. And assuming I remembered this correctly, when I go to my next page, watch me be screwed up, in which case I'll pull up my, yep, I screwed up. You knew I'd forget the right thing, right? Let me jump to my slide, make sure I did this right. Got it. I selected my row header. I didn't want my row header. I wanted my static here. So this static, it's kind of hard to see, but it goes with this first cell. So on my static, in my row group, now I go to repeat on new page. There you are, true. And see, I do this so often that I forget every time how to do this correctly. So here's page 1, scroll down so that we jump to page 2, joink, page 2, now it repeats there. I'm just gonna hit this so that you can see it's page 3, page 4, page 5, everything's changing. And I've always got that row header up here. Now, if you have multiple groups, this gets really tricky because if you want a row header of a group repeated, then the headers of the previous outer group also have to be repeated. So if I were going to group my details, add a group, parent group, let's say I'm going to organize based on, well, yeah, we can do name, add a group, header, footer, thoink. So then this header row would also have to be repeated in order, in order for this row to repeat, this row has to be repeated as well. So the encapsulating group, its headers also have to repeat if you want a subgroup's headers to repeat on new pages. It's just a rule of how it works. Don't ask me why, it's the way that it's built. So that's kind of where that's going. All right, do I have any other questions that I've missed in here? Let's see, we did Caleb, okay. Is there a case version of if? You can use switch statements. So inside of SSRS, you're basically working with VB.NET or VB script, kind of a mix. So you'd use, I believe it's either a case or a switch that you would use as the VB comparable item for the IF. IF lets you do basically if the argument's true, do the first one, otherwise do the second one. And oftentimes what I'll do is I'll just nest the IFs together because it's much easier to read that inside of the VB script than it is to try and put everything on the correct lines and for doing a case or a switch. If you're going to have a very complex case or a switch, then yeah, the switch might be working better. It's not possible to preview reports in the cloud unless someone knows a way. Again, if you download your report data and you've got that file local for your report data, you can preview while you're doing your development. So you can actually work from the cloud because I've done this on-prem. So it's not actually hitting the database when I run the report. I'm just using that data file from the RDD and work with it. Aaron, when I've added fields into my SQL stored procedure, I find I have to rerun the query to get that field in there. Is there an easier way? Yes, Aaron. So what you can do is you come over to your data set, right click properties or double click it, do this refresh fields. That's all you have to do. So if I add a field, click refresh, hit OK, it'll show up in this list. So very important if you add or remove fields to do that. Troy Parson, on a PO, we get large blank area in between lines on the PO. It then places the line on another page. So we condense so that blank areas, condense the blank areas so all items show on the same page. Kind of, sort of, depends on what's causing those blanks. So it's hard for me to answer that without knowing why are the blanks there. Specifically, what I would look at, let me back the group out here. Joink, there we go. What I would look at, let's say that you've got like an extra detail row in here, and that's causing you blanks. I would look at row visibility. So this might have fields on it, and those fields are blank inside of the database. So what I would do is I'd come into row visibility, and I'd say show or hide based on an expression, and I could do something like, I could say, is the length of name greater than 0. Oops, it'd have to be equal to 0 because this is the hidden value. So if that's true, it's going to hide it. If it's false, it'll show it. So that's an easy way to do that. If you've got multiple fields on the row, you'd want to check all of those, and then that hides the row. So with SSRS, if a row is here, even if all the fields are blank, it's still going to show that row. So you actually have to hide the row, which will cause things to collapse. As well, if you've got blank space between items, that blank space will always be preserved. So in this case, because I've got blank space between the bottom of my table and my footer, at the end of my report, I'm going to end up with this blank space. So if you ever end up with that problem where you're like, why am I getting extra space at the end of my report? Come here, grab that, shove it up. So now, whenever my table ends, that's the end of my report. If I've got white space here, watch me try and do this, yay, then that white space will always appear at the bottom of my table. That's because if you've got the white space, SSRS thinks you've got to have the white space. A lot of times the report's too wide. Not sure what you're talking about there. I'm guessing what you mean is that when you print the report, you're getting some blank pages on the item, or it's too wide, it's going across your margins. So come in, what I did is I right click on this background area over here, report properties, check your margins out. So I've got an 8.5 page, and my left margin and my right margin are 1/4 inch. So I've got a printable area of 8 inches. So if I click in my body, I want to make sure that the body size is 8 inches or less. If it's larger than 8 inches, again, I have to preserve that white space. So if I make this, let's just say I'm going to crank this over to here. So my one page is going to have my data on it because that goes out to 8 inches right here. But I still have to print this white space. So I'm going to get another page that's going to be blank because of this white space. And then my third page will have data, and then the fourth page will be blank. Very common problem. Make sure you're within your printable area. If the report layout is greater than the page, it will do a space on the next page. Yep, we just covered that. It's the answer to the previous questions. I got to read further down. Sorry, Nathan. When you have grouping, how do you hide rows where the sum of one field is 0? And I think we kind of did that. You can go into the details here. You can actually set your group properties, whether they're visible or not, for the entire group, or you can come into your detail rows, row visibility, and again, do that show or hide based on expression. So those are the ways to do that. Okay, I think I caught up on questions. Phew, okay. Repeating table headers. So now we were going to do the matrix. Sorry, my samples over here were in case I screwed things up. So my sample 1 was an example of this first guy. And if I preview him, I think we covered everything that I did. I just had different fields in different orders, so no big deal there. Okay, so now let's go into a matrix. So I'm going to go here, and we're going to name this matrix. How am I doing on time? Woohoo, I still got, oh wait, I go to 1:30, don't I? Ooh, I got to rush. All right, so a matrix, what that lets you do is, I'm just going to grab toolbox, matrix, choink. I need a data set, SQL, stored procedure. We're going to use orders by year, month, customer. There we go. And I'm going to drag this guy up. So a matrix is a little bit different than a table. You'll notice I've got row headers and I've got column headers. So a matrix lets me repeat information both vertically, horizontally. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my data set here, which I called data set 1 ever so smoothly. And then, you know what I'm going to do? Just to make this work faster, I'm going to bring up sample 2 so that I don't have to show you what I'm doing. It's the same thing. I created a calculated field here called order month year. And what that does is it just concatenates the order year and the order month together so that I can sort on that. And then I put the customer's name and I put the order year month up here and then the order count. When I run this, for each order year month combination, I'm going to get a column. For each customer, I'm going to get a row. If that customer doesn't have a value for that order year month combination, it's going to be blank. So I can kind of see different information in here. So this is good when you're trying to do something such as customers over time, parts over time, parts over customers, things like that, where either one, your X values or your Y values could be changing. It's handy to be able to do this because it'll just dynamically figure out, oh, I need this number of rows, this number of columns, and it just does it for you. Now, the tricky part here is, you'll notice, hey, my matrix is wider than my printable area because my printable area goes to the end of this logo. So what happens, and actually, I'll show you one of my later tricks, is this print layout button is a godsend. If you click this, you'll actually go and look like, well, this is what it's going to look like when I print it. Here's what my margins are and everything. So if I go to my next page, you'll notice, well, my report header repeated. Now I've got these extra columns over here. That's the kind of downside of doing a matrix, is that you can end up with enough columns that it goes across your printable area. That may not be a big deal to you. It may not be a report you want printed, so who cares in that case? If it is a report you want printed, make sure you keep control with that print layout. Also, free advice too, if you're going to export your reports to Excel, keep things very simple, and as much as possible, make everything line up. For example, in this case, if I were going to export this to Excel, because this report title goes all the way over here, Excel's going to have a cell for this column, a cell for each of these other columns, and if it doesn't line up with the end of this text box or the beginning of this image box, then it's going to have other cells because it's going to need to merge those items together because Excel's a grid layout. So it's going to subdivide things and it can be very ugly. So usually if I'm going to have somebody tell me that they want things in Excel, I actually don't do a header at all because it just gets in the way. And then I'll keep things simple to either a tablix or a matrix, and that's it. Because otherwise it's going to get too complex and Excel's just going to sit there and have problems trying to display all the information. It'll do it. It's just not going to be a happy Excel if you try to manipulate it for formulas. If I keep it as a matrix or a tablix, then it's very easy to manipulate the data inside of Excel like you would expect. Okay. My other thing that I was going to show you is graphs. And we're going to see if I can, what am I at? 22. I got 8 minutes left. Okay, we'll try and do a graph real quick. So if I go over to my matrix, I'm just going to kill this guy off. There we go. So I'm going to drop in a graph, which is a chart. And I can choose all sorts of different charts. SSRS gives you these for free. You can actually change the type of chart you want after you've got it in here as well. And I'm just going to expand this guy so that I've got enough space that it makes sense. So when I work with a chart, I want to be able to click in this area and then I get this chart data out here. And then I have to tell it what values am I looking at. So I'm going to look at my order count is going to be my grid line, so to speak. My series is going to be my name, if I remember my demo correctly. And then my category groups, I believe, are my order month year, which I didn't keep in here. Oh, darn. Okay, we'll flip back so that I don't screw this up. So I had my name, my order year month, which was my calculated field. So the category groups are basically your series. I also went in, it can seem somewhat hard to manipulate the charts if you're not used to it. Typically you'll have a title up here. You need to click in that area, then click again and you can change this title. Oops, I was gonna say changed. Never fails, when people are watching you can do it, can't type. You can also have your series, my Y series axis, I can manipulate that. I also have my Y text that I can change. I'm just going to change this. When I edit it, it goes horizontally. When I click off of it, notice it goes vertically again. When I run this, we'll go to our last page here. Oops. There's my graph. Let's get out of print view mode so that you can see it a little bit better. So I've got my series. I've got a nice little legend up here for my different companies and different colors for each of those graphs, and depending on the year month combination, and it draws the lines between them because this one didn't have anything leading before it. That's why we've got the blank areas. Now it's automatically scaling the axis. So I've got more data than will fit. So instead of having dates, one right on top of the other, it figures out, okay, I'm just going to display these two. If I had more space on the report, it'd spread things out a little bit more. Graphs are a very nice way to convey a lot of information very quickly to your users. So here I can see, hey, we had a spike and then a drop off. If I had to look at order counts and actually parse that in my head would start going, okay, what's higher, what's lower, blah, blah, blah. But graphically, I can see this very quickly and I can make some judgments on things. I can also know, oh, hey, this blue line, that's probably, what's blue? It's probably Buckstar Store 675, or it could be Dalton Manufacturing because they're close to blue. You got to be careful sometimes because your series, you can have 50 items in the series. Now you're starting to skew your information. So your colors are going to run into each other, or like down here, the information is so close together, it's hard to tell. So make sure your graphs are useful. Graphs can be too much information sometimes. Sometimes they're a great way to convey a lot of information very quickly. So you're going to have to try things out, figure out what works for you and what works for your team. If they don't comprehend the graphs, maybe they're better off at comprehending just raw data, and that's okay. Just kind of depends on what works together. All right, I got 4 minutes left. So I had a stump the chump question, which actually was asked at the beginning. How do I do a keep together? Because things aren't keeping together. So what I did is I took my orders get for company that I showed you on the first report, and I made a parameter for it that tells me how many records I want to get back. And I believe I defaulted this to 8. So if I preview my report, and notice I've got white space up here. The reason I wanted the white space is so that I can show you, hey, I got white space, and then I've got my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 items. If I change this to 10 and hit view report, this is what people complain about with the keep together. I get blank space. Why? Because I've got my tablets set to keep together. And so it's trying to keep all 10 records together where it can. And so because of that, it shoved them all onto the next page because there was enough space to put them on the next page. But that means I've got white space ahead of it. So you have to be careful with this. If you've got more than will fit on a page, so let's say I pull back 25 records, view report. Now I've got them back on the first page, second page, and some on the third. That's because my tablets won't fit on a single page. So the keep together is disregarded. So those are the tricks that people usually run into is, hey, my stuff isn't always showing on a single page. Sometimes it won't fit on the single page. Sometimes because I've got so much white space ahead of something, or I've got other controls up here, it's pushing it to the next page. So you have to be aware of what you can do. As well, you can also do keep together at the row level. So in this case, notice that I've got my all my text fitting on a single row here. Let me jump out of the mode so you can kind of see better. So that row is always staying together. I just put in extra text after my name. So I'm going to expand this row down a little bit so you can see what happens. So with that, what I did is when I go to 8 and do a print layout, notice that it keeps that row together. If I go to 25 so that it spans multiple pages, it's still keeping that row. It's not splitting this row. And if I go next page, it's keeping that row together. So when you do the keep together, it depends on where you put it. If you've got the tablets, there's a keep together. And then at the row level, you can also do a keep together. So it depends on what you're trying to keep together as to what you can do. And then got just enough time, I think. Calvin had mentioned formulas. So one thing I did is on this part number field here, I went in and did a formula. Now, normally I would probably just put the formula right in here. I'll show you the expression, but I wanted to show you, you can actually do code inside of the report. So I'm going to back out here, right click in this background, go to report properties, this code section over here. Again, using VBScript or VB.NET type of syntax, I can declare a function, give it a name, give it some parameters, what is it returning, and then put in my method that I'm actually calling. So in this case, if the part is DCD300, I'm going to make it red, otherwise it'll be blank. And when I run the report, you'll see DCD 300. That's why these are red and the rest of them are black. So that code is handy if you need to reuse that code across multiple spots in your report. So if you're doing that, that's an easy way to actually reuse code across things. And I think that gets me to, we'll just quickly walk through this, make sure I didn't miss anything. Alternating row colors, hyperlinks we covered, repeating table headers, matrix so that you can see what things are done, graphs, print layout for testing things, keep together. Again, this is a perfect example of using that print layout button so that you make sure what is happening is what you expect to happen. If it's not, fix it. Adding code to the report. The big kicker on that adding code to the report is make sure you do this equal code dot and then whatever your function is. So that's how you reference those guys. If you're looking for some more information, Google SSRS tutorial. There's a lot of stuff on Microsoft Learn, Microsoft.com, docs.microsoft.com. The big key here is make sure you do the tutorial for the version you've got of SSRS. Otherwise, you could end up trying to do a feature that's in a newer version that you don't have. So you can end up with that problem. epiusers.help, always a good resource for things. And we've got 2 classes on SSRS coming up this fall. If you want more information, I've got the URL down here to give you information on that, or just contact sales@codabears.com and they'll get you signed up. All right, and I think I've still got a couple questions. Calvin, how am I doing on time? When did Karen and Lisa start up? Oh, I put Calvin to sleep. Let me
No,
find.
you didn't put me to sleep, but they start at 1:45. It's 1:31 right now. So if you need to run a few over and answer Q&A, that's totally fine.
Okay. I've got to find where I left off in questions. Okay.
I've been pushing the answered ones off my grid.
Yeah, what is the best practice for auto emailing an SSRS report? So for me, Aaron, what I would do is on your portal, you can go in and you can set up subscriptions to the report. So let me try and do this here real quick. Dev-SQL 2019 reports. Oops. Of course, that's going to come up this way. HTTP SQL 2019 reports. Oh, helps if you spell it right too, doesn't it? You ever have one of those days? /reports. There we go. So let's say I came into Fred test 1. That one doesn't have any reports to go with it. Fine. Bill, do you have any reports? Okay, he's got a sample report. So I could come in here, I believe, if I go to manage subscriptions, then I can create a subscription to actually have that come to me automatically. The kicker with this is when the report automatically runs, it has to run as someone typically. So when you do your SSRS setup, and that would be, you can modify that with the SSRS configuration tool on your SSRS server, you can designate what account runs the reports if they're unattended. So whatever that account is, that's what the permissions are when it runs. So you want to be careful with what you're setting up so that you don't expose too much information, but it has enough rates that it can actually run the report. Typically not a problem, especially with stored procedures. Is there a way to get the report to print on continuous paper like receipt paper? We can display at an infinite height, but how can you avoid setting a page height in the page size for printing? You can't. You have to set a page size. So if you're going to try and print it on an infinite sheet of paper, you could say that the page height is 1,000 inches. The problem with that is, I think when you go to print it, your footer would be at the 1,000th of an inch. And so you're going to get all that extra white space in there. So there's no concept behind that because most people don't print reports on continuous paper like that. You're going to have some sort of cutoff somewhere. And typically the reports were made to be printed by like a laser printer. So pages of information. So that would be the best guess I would have for you, Brianna.
Fred, could you calculate how many rows you're printing and then change the size of the section with a function?
You could try it. You'll have mixed success because tables, the row of a table will grow in the height to fit the contents of the cell. So unless you know exactly that your report is never going to have cells that need to grow, as long as the cells are always going to be, let's say, 1/4 of an inch tall, then in theory you could calculate, I've got 12 rows at 1/4 inch each. That's going to be 3 inches. Add whatever your header and your footer on, and then you could set that as your page size. I've never tried to set the page size dynamically at runtime, so I'm not sure if you can do it and if it would hold, but that would be another way to do it. If you're going to have text that wraps within a cell, then that's totally thrown out the water because you don't know the height of each row when you go to print, or when you go to run that calculation, you would only know it after the report runs. All right. Any other questions? I still got 9 minutes, or you can take a 9-minute break. Woohoo! And I even got through the 2 extra things that Calvin threw at me this morning. All right, if you come up with more questions, welcome to throw them in and we can get to them during Stump the Chump as well. I will put the slides out when I do the minutes, and I can put those sample 1, sample 2 out there as well for you so that you've got, can you show your screen that can I show my screen with SSRS? I'm not sure what you're asking for, Chris. Is this what you're looking for? But when I post the minutes, I'll have the slide deck as well as the sample reports. I'll try to get out there for you so that you can refer to them for the keep togethers and the background colors. And Christopher, if you can just tell me a little bit more what you're looking for. I'm not sure I understand your question there.
Yeah, did you want to see the SSRS report designer in report builder or the portal with the report?
All right, I'll hang out while we wait for Chris and any other questions. Classes, are they specific to on-premise cloud or Visual Studio Report Builder? So the classes that I run, we do use stored procedures, and I am using an on-premise SQL. But what I'm teaching you is how to work with SSRS. So how do I work with graphs? How do I work with matrices? How do I work with these different things? When do I know that I want a sub-report for something? Those are all concepts you can take back regardless whether you're using RDDs, you're in the cloud, or you're using stored procedures. It doesn't matter whether you're using SQL, XML for your data source, Oracle, whatever. It's more teaching you how do I work with SSRS so that you can take those concepts and go back and build stronger reports. I've found a lot of people are stuck in a rut with SSRS and they look at what Epicor gives them. And because Epicor, a lot of the stuff is just rows and columns of data, that's what they think SSRS can do. And there's so much more you can do with it. And once you start looking at things like graphs and indicators and charts, you can make your data a lot more valuable and a lot easier to interpret. So that's why I take that route. Can I show my screen on the SSRS tutorial page? I actually didn't do a search for the tutorial. But yeah, you can just do SSRS tutorial. Freak. Oh, you might be meaning, I'm sorry. Now I think I know what he means. Go back to that. I think that's the page that you wanted. Sorry about that, Christopher. Just wasn't understanding for a little bit, or wasn't thinking the right way. I'm sorry. Gotcha. Yay, we answered Christopher's question. Rock on.